for a new episode of You and the Law Podcast, the one and only law enforcement podcast that's tackling critical policing and social justice issues and provides insights into the daily realities of policing with your host, Chief Virgil Green.
It's called one of the greatest public health challenges of our time. Our nation's mental health is in crisis, and there's one very big thing contributing to it. Good evening. Experts say it is a crisis, and it's made worse by the COVID pandemic and the growing impact of social media, particularly on our young people.
Yeah, this week the current U.S. Surgeon General and all of his living predecessors met to discuss the mental challenges Americans are facing.
And I have to look at my 3 teenagers every day and know that I'm not handing them a better world than the world that was left to me. And a lot of that is because of our failure to really focus on mental health and to do the hard things that it's going to take to actually overcome this mental health crisis that we're in.
7 of the U.S. Surgeons General met at Dartmouth College, with one participating by video. The historic meeting highlighting the depth of the crisis.
We have become professionals at putting on masks on and walking around society and making it seem like everything is going fine, like we don't need any help, that there's nothing to see here. We do that in person, we do that on our social media feeds, but what it betrays is the reality of what's happening is that a lot of people are walking around suffering.
About 42% of high schoolers say they constantly feel sad or hopeless. That's up more than 50% from 1999. 41% of undergrads reported overall depression, and 14% reported suicidal ideation in the past year.
We've lost trust in everything, and I think some of that's intentional. I think there's things at play that make us want to distrust each other and distrust anything, any institution, churches, politics, whatever it is. I mean, trusting your neighbors, but we have to figure out a way to go back and establish that trust.
Even though the problems that we've described here and the drivers of those problems are really profound and entrenched and structural in nature, that doesn't mean that we as individuals can't make a difference in the mental health and well-being of people around us.
Now, that group said it's critical to create better safety standards for social media, train more mental health providers, and cover more of the cost of mental health care. They also urged everyone to be kinder to each other and also to be supportive of the people in our lives.
I want to welcome everybody to another episode of You and the Law Podcast. I'm the host of the show, Chief Virgil Green. As always, thank you for tuning in and joining us. As you know, this month of May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And just because it's May doesn't mean we just really need to focus on mental health in May, but it's something that we really need to talk about throughout the year, 365 days a year. And with that being said, I've got a guest that I need to bring on the podcast. She is definitely a professional in the field of mental health. And I want to introduce my guest, Dr. Mo. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for coming on You and the Law Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, Dr. Mo, you've got your title is very long, and I don't want to mess it up. So I will let you tell our listeners about you and what you're doing in the field of mental health.
So actually, I'm CEO and Chief Clinical Neuropsychometrician of my consulting group that I have in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. We do focus on mental health consulting, mainly focusing on the brain behavior relationship between that, mental disorders, and the legal system. From a clinical perspective, as a clinical neuropsychometrician, that's a scientist who actually interviews and diagnoses for severe mental illnesses, while also looking at the validity and accuracy of the instruments that we use to test clients for those particular disorders. But predominantly with my business, we're just focusing right now on research and science behind that relationship between mental health conditions, science, the law, and the brain.
Okay. Now, how long have you been doing that?
I would say since 2020.
Okay.
Around COVID timeframe, that's when I was really working on my doctorate in psychology. Really became interested in why we don't necessarily focus on the brain and how the brain can really either exacerbate mental health conditions or literally cause mental health conditions. So I
Okay.
became interested in it around that time.
Okay. And you also have a background. You're a former military. Thank you for your service. And so let us listen up. What branch of service did you serve in?
I was in the Air Force and I served for 13 years.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So what did you, what were you in the Air Force? I mean, were you like a pilot, a jet fighter pilot, or?
I wish. I dabbled in different things. I started off in communications and information.
Okay.
It was actually called information management. So I had the ability to work in any type of unit. So it could have been finance, maintenance, personnel management. I even worked in security offices with the weapons school in Las Vegas. So being able to have that job was definitely cool because I was able to travel all over the world and then get to experience the different careers in the Air Force. And then I ended up in security management, national security towards the end of my tenure in the military.
Okay. Okay. So what really motivated you to get into the mental health aspect of it, and for you to start your own business or company to really focus on mental health?
I would say it was when I was deployed to Afghanistan. It was a last minute unexpected deployment for me. And so deploying by yourself is one thing because people usually deploy in units. I deployed alone. So that's the one thing, the experience going to a combat zone. And when you enter, you already seeing people who have been there for a while, ready to go. And even though I went alone, I did travel with people that we were on the same cycle, that we left around the same time, and watching them change as I seen them every day and then come back to our base different. I was curious about mental health because we all seen different things and experienced different things while we were there, but we also handled it differently when we came back. Some people came back depressed, some were sick, some discharged due to medical and mental health conditions. And I'm like, hey, I'm really interested about, that because I don't think I would have been that interested had I not had that own experience for myself.
Oh, okay.
So when I came back to the States, I decided to pursue another degree in psychology. And that's where I ended up, researching more about combat veterans deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's where the interest came. And that's where I start seeing, significant numbers and people coming back and being diagnosed with a mental health condition.
Yeah. Well, and and I'm sure you know this, there's been so much conversation around, people who served in the military, with the Iraq War, Afghanistan, the wars that we've had. And when they come back, there's not a lot of resources. And it's kind of like people like trying to figure out, well, what's wrong with you? And so, we've talked about mental health a lot on the podcast, and there's not really to point fingers at anybody, but or just to ask you this question, being in the military, do you see that the military is doing enough to really help the men and women with these, suffering from mental health?
I will say from when I was into present, there's more resources, more access to programs than there was when I was in.
Okay.
To be honest, when I came back from my deployment, I did screeners. And I guess those screeners were trying to detect if I experienced something, was exposed to something, and did it affect me? I remember doing that. It was like one time every year for like 3 years, and it kind of stopped. And to be honest, I don't even remember what the questions were, but I remember it said mental health screener.
Okay.
And when I thought about it, I was like, when I reintegrated back into work, my supervisor said that he noticed I was different.
Okay.
He said I was more, aggressive. I was more, he didn't say jaded, but he felt like from his lens looking at me that I felt like what I was doing overseas was more important than what I was doing back in the States. And I did feel that way because I felt like every minute, second of my time, I was doing something to support that campaign.
Okay.
And then I come back and I'm just doing regular
stuff.
And I'm like, this is not important. This is not, and I get what he meant by it, but he couldn't explain what he thought it was. And I bet in hindsight, he's like, she was probably going through something, she probably couldn't adjust, probably some type of adjustment. And so even with me having my experience, you got to think about infantrymen, people who are there for 15, 18-month tours, the ones that are fighting outside the wire.
Yeah.
How are they coming back? And are they getting the same regular screener that I'm getting? And is that screener sufficient enough to say, hey, this person is okay to go back to work? Or no, this person is not okay. Let us get additional evaluations to determine what's going on. I don't feel like that was going on when I was in the military.
Okay.
But I feel like today it's better, but it's still, we need to come a long way just based on the research that I've done alone. I feel like there's still more that can be done. Yeah.
Well, and especially when you have men and women who've been deployed, back to back. I mean, you're talking some people, 4 and 5 times being deployed, and you really haven't gotten over, the first, deployment, and then you're sent back for another one. And, and I guess, now, like you're saying, there's probably more resources that's being put into it. But, when you have these situations with the men and women, especially in the military, with PTSD, and in your research, how is that information being passed on to the branches in the military to say this person is probably not ready to go back into that environment?
Well, the different branches have different programs in how they handle mental health processes. And I will definitely say that the Army is the largest branch that deals with the most mental health issues. And they do it differently than the Air Force. When I was doing my research, it was an 11-year time frame, 2005 to 2016. If everybody who deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan during that time frame was over 2.3 million.
Oh, wow.
In that time frame.
Yeah.
And 50% came back with a mental health issue. And most of those, I would say about 90 to 95% of those were the Army.
Okay.
And they were either diagnosed with PTSD, major depression, or traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
And so I don't want to speak for the Army because I wasn't in the Army, but what I do know is when I was trained by one of my former clinical supervisors, he was on a team that built this assessment called the ANAM, which is the Automated Neuropsychological Assessment Metric. That was done by the Department of the Army, and they sold it to a civilian company. However, they used that as a screener for the soldiers to go and see if they're ready, combat ready to deploy, and would use that same screener when they came back to determine if they were fit for duty when they came back. And so ANAM, I was trained on it, and it's definitely a comprehensive tool. You can do like a large battery to check for, cognitive functioning, decline, processing speed, all those different things. However, when you're looking functionally at the brain, that's one thing. But then you got to look at all the other factors, like familial factors, like how's home life? How was home life when they were deployed? How is it when they come back? What is their previous mental health history? Do they have any health issues? Do they smoke? Do they drink? All these things are, factors that need to be combined. Was that screener sufficient enough to determine whether people were fit for duty to come back, or were they even fit to fight in the first place?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the major things that I know that they use, but I don't want to speak on them. But I know when we were in training, that's what we were talking about. And I'm like, if that's the only screener that's relied on to just determine fit for duty or fit to fight, that's definitely would be a disservice. I'm sure there's other factors too, but during training, that's one of the important things that we did talk about, because, having a comprehensive assessment, I feel like would be more conducive to people really being weaned out, being like, okay, this person cannot deploy. Or if they come back, oh no, we have to do additional testing and evaluation, even some medical evaluations as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and and this was before your time and my time, the Vietnam War. You had a lot of men that suffered a lot of traumatic incidents there, and they came back, and I just think that from that, I don't think America was really prepared to deal with the mental health of men back then. And, and not to just focus on one race, but I think, when you look at it, it definitely affected everybody who went. But I think, for the Black community, you saw a lot more Black men who really, there was a lot of doors that were closed on them trying to get some help with their mental health. And probably some of them probably didn't even really want to even talk about it. And the one thing that you just mentioned that I think that's not even done, even in law enforcement, we don't really do a good job of really making sure that these individuals are ready to serve in the military or in law enforcement. And what kind of mental health conditions do they already have that would really kind of expose some things that we need to know about? Can you kind of speak on that?
Great topic, because I did talk to a few people when I was doing my clinical work. There were some that came to me and said that they tried to, join the military and they couldn't because of mental health conditions.
Okay.
I was actually shocked by that because, again, I went in 2002. I don't remember if they did a mental health assessment. I really don't. But the fact that some people were denied just for having anxiety and depression.
Okay.
That's what let me know, like, okay, for the Air Force, I knew for a fact it was about 5 of them that came to me and had told me, like, yeah, I tried to join and I couldn't because of this. And that's what let me know, okay, they are fine-tuning their processes for mental health conditions.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're not just going to deny you if you have depression, anxiety. Like, I don't know one person in this world that's probably never experienced some form of depression or some form of anxiety. It's about how you are able to manage it, if it's long-term, the severity of it, if you're on medication for it, long-term history, family history, all those things are factors. Didn't really go into depth with those people to really find out, but I know there had to be some more like additional justifications to why they were denied. In terms of law enforcement, it's interesting because I went to a conference last year in Las Vegas. It was a law enforcement conference, and listening to a lot of, police officers retired and still in active duty. I'm talking about 25, 30 years of service.
Yeah.
Still talk about the stigma. I felt like I was listening to service members because you all experience the same thing that we do, the stigma behind having something and don't want to say anything because
Exactly.
job security, military clearances is like, I don't want to say anything because if I do, it'll affect my clearance. I can't be put on medication. It'll affect my clearance.
Yeah.
I might have to change jobs or even get, separated from service. And to listen to those stories and to have law enforcement officers just bottle it up inside until they explode.
Exactly.
It was so shocking to me because this is not to downgrade the military by any means, but when we're called in garrison, we are literally doing the jobs that we were trained to do until we're called to deploy.
Yeah. Okay.
So unless we're deployed or training to deploy, we are in our bases doing our jobs. Law enforcement, you all are going out every day not knowing if you're coming back. Every single day that you leave, you don't know if you're coming home. So to have that type of mindset for 20, 30 some years and don't get the help that you need because of the stigma or the lack of resources or even not having the support from your leadership.
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you
definitely eye-opening.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, you just mentioned about having the support from your leadership. There really has not been really any support from the leadership. You've got some agencies, they do a good job and some agencies don't. But like you said, there's this stigma that surrounds law enforcement that it's not something that we're going to talk about. And if you do have a problem, you don't say anything, because if you do, you may end up getting stuck on a shift you don't want to be put on, or you're going to get isolated from the group that you want to be a part of, and which is not healthy for the police officers and especially for the community. And I think the community has suffered more. The community and families has suffered more than anybody, because you get an officer who has seen a lot, but nobody is really kind of sitting down and saying, hey, how did you process that? How did you deal with that? And this is one thing, Dr. Mo, that a lot of people don't realize. We say this in the law enforcement is kind of a paramilitary style organization. You kind of have a lot of people that are served in the military come back, they get into law enforcement. And so, but officers are dealing with a lot of societal issues. You may respond to a home where the child has been abused, the mother's been abused, and then you may go to a call. The next call is going to be a fatality accident. That's something that you just you're not prepared to even deal with, but you have to deal with it. Yeah. And so, like you just mentioned, 20, 30 years you've been doing this and nobody is saying anything to you about it. And all of a sudden something happens that triggers something and you're not the same person.
Right.
And so, a friend of mine, he's a police officer with Oklahoma City. Well, he's since retired. And I'll share this story with you and the listeners that, the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And so many police officers responded to that bombing, as well as first responders. There wasn't any type of debriefing that took place back then for any of us that had to respond to that bombing. And about 5 years later, probably longer than that, he ended up going to kind of like a debriefing. And everybody thought it was the bombing that he was, having some anxiety with, but it was actually an officer-involved shooting. And so, but it really kind of, made me think about, well, what about all the other men and women who responded to the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 that nobody is really, there's just really no help there. So, but, and again, in the work that you're doing, in the research, what do you think could be done better to really prevent some of these things from happening?
Well, one of the things you mentioned was debriefing. I don't think we do enough of that, or the types of debriefing that we do is not as effective.
Okay.
So in mental health, when we're talking about crises, like what you're talking about, the examples, it's called like psychological debriefing. But research actually shows that psychological debriefing does not help manage PTSD symptoms or even make them worse. It could possibly make them worse because that type of debriefing is not even necessarily meant to be long-term. And some of the processes in that type of debriefing is not effective for somebody who's been exposed to trauma.
Okay.
So when I read that, I was like, so why are we doing it?
Yeah.
Okay.
One, yeah, really. Yeah.
And number two, if it's necessary, why don't we make the necessary changes to make it effective?
Yeah.
Like every time I was studying, I would see that question, I knew the answer, because I'm like, this doesn't even make sense. It's not as effective, or it could be worse, or you could use it with other type of treatment modalities. Why are we using it if that's the case?
Yeah, exactly.
So I definitely feel like, I just started teaching new classes this week.
Okay.
And I asked one of the students, I said, what do you plan to do after your military, tenure ends? Because I don't think he's necessarily going to retire. I think he's just getting out. And he's like, I want to work for FEMA. And he said, what are your thoughts? I'm open to any thoughts. And the first thing I thought about, we need more emergency management professionals.
Yeah.
Because like we do need more law enforcement, but we do need more emergency management, because they could be those liaisons between mental health crises, being exposed to traumatic incidents, major disasters, natural disasters, all those things. And their responsibilities are to respond to those disasters, have communications in line for those. But what about the large component that's missing? Mental health for the professionals who are actually working and those
Yeah.
actually being exposed, the victims.
Yeah.
So I feel like in all aspects, we need to have a federal program that's built on improving the type of debriefings and even preparation processes too, for these type of disasters, because it's not just going to be violence and, like you said, car accidents. There's going to also be, and I don't want to say it, but we're still vulnerable to terroristic acts, bombings, major crises that I don't think that we're prepared for. We wasn't prepared for Katrina in 2005. Would we be prepared for another natural or major disaster today? I don't think so.
No. Well, and it's, you bring up what happened with Katrina in 2005. I mean, that was something that everybody thought, oh, we're prepared for. But then all of a sudden you realize within it didn't take a long time to realize we're not prepared to deal with it. And it's just like when you mentioned the person saying he wanted to, maybe go work for FEMA. FEMA responds to a lot of natural disasters. And, being from Oklahoma, Oklahoma is Tornado Alley, and so you have a lot of people responding to tornadoes, and homes are being torn up. People are being, tossed all around. And so you're seeing things that you typically would not see. And how do you as an individual really process that, especially if you're going through something that you're not seeing anything about, but you have a job to do. And I think, that's something that is really missing, is the fact that people really need to probably just say, hey, listen, I'm experiencing some things that I just don't think I need to be in this space, because it's not good for me and it's not good for the people I'm trying to help. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
No, Chief, you make a great point, because this was another thing that I was talking to a colleague about. We were talking about PTSD and being exposed to traumatic events. When we think about PTSD, we automatically think about law enforcement and military.
Exactly.
We don't think about regular civilians can be traumatized. Katrina was traumatizing. People lost homes, jobs, financial security. Some of them were injured. Some of them died.
Yeah.
We feel it. Okay, there was a natural disaster. However, people who still think about it or have symptoms of PTSD related to Katrina, you don't have to be physically exposed to be mentally affected by it.
Exactly.
So traumatic events are not just killings, murders, people dying from, diseases. It could be natural disasters. It could be, even if you say that you knew somebody was in a car accident, you didn't see it, you were not exposed to the trauma, but it traumatizes you because you knew the person and you were close to the person who was involved in that event. Yeah. So when we start to think of it that way, that's why I think we're going to do a better service in having better mental health services, not just trying to say PTSD affects this type of person or it's only in these high functioning, high dangerous careers. No, it could be anybody who's exposed to anything that's traumatic. And once we identify that, and once people realize what they're feeling, oh my gosh, I must be having symptoms of PTSD or depression, I think that's going to be the step in the right direction. Some people don't realize what they're experiencing. They just know they feel something. They don't feel, normal, or they don't feel like they should be, and they don't know how to identify that.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Mo, you bring up so many good points. I mean, just thinking back to Katrina, people saw bodies laying just everywhere. I mean, they couldn't escape it. And but also you had the kids that were exposed to that. And I think that's another piece of this conversation when we talk about, mental health awareness, is that how are the kids being affected because the adults can process a lot of things, but the kids, is different. And, and you're bringing back some memories of what happened in Katrina that we saw so many horrible images of people, on rooftops, and we saw people that bodies had floated up on cars and all, but you had kids seeing that. And now here we are. Did anybody ever think about how those kids would, how they would be impacted from that 10 years, 20 years from now?
And that's a great question. I'm sure that wasn't even a thought process.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
It's affected because my daughter was born in 2005, so she wasn't aware of Katrina. But can you imagine a kid 3, 4, or maybe even 5 years old 20 years ago? Now they're 25.
Yeah.
People don't realize what you're exposed to when you're a child, that affects you in your adulthood. I call it the super effect, because it might not affect you then, maybe not even a few years from that accident or incident, but along the lines, it's going to affect you. And as long as you're not aware of it, or you are, and you don't do anything about it, that's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's where I correlate COVID-19 to. Think about all the kids that were going to school during the pandemic. All of a sudden you're living a normal life, going to school Monday through Friday, and now you're stuck at home, sequestered at home, trying to learn, for the first time online.
Yeah.
That whole culture, not having a social life or friends, what about an only child that has no sisters or brothers and has no social exposure? And then for a year, 2, 3 years, this is the life that they're living. And then all of a sudden, everybody's going back to school. There was no process of how to, prepare these kids to go back and live a life that they had years ago. A lot of them didn't adjust. A lot of them developed anxiety, depression. A lot of them we found had ADHD.
Yeah.
You should have seen when I was doing clinical work, how prevalent mental health was in kids trying to Google and actually diagnose themselves based on what they were feeling, because that's what we live in, social media and the internet. They just type up, I feel like this, and this. Oh, you may have anxiety based on what you provided. And now they're coming to me saying, I have anxiety. Well, let's back up.
Yeah.
What's going on, But I think about Katrina because that was like the biggest thing that I was ever exposed to in my military career. And then I think about COVID because I think about all the kids that are suffering today because of what happened 6 years ago.
Exactly.
I want to see people live totally differently, have different lives, and even act differently just because of that pandemic and what they were exposed to.
Yeah. Well, and, it's something that we've also talked about on the podcast is the fact that, during the pandemic, like you said, everything was just pretty much isolated. And then all of a sudden, here you are being put back into an environment.
Yeah. Here you go.
Yeah. And how do you adjust to that? And some people adjusted to it and some people didn't. And, I'm not a doctor. I'm not like you, but I think, how has that played into violence among young men and women? Because go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish your thought.
Because I'm just thinking, you've got a lot of isolation, and now you got kids who are trying to figure out how to manage things. And here they are with a group of kids and they're telling them this and that. And next thing you know, they're out doing things that they normally wouldn't have been doing. And so, but nobody is really, the parents are not saying anything. And a lot of kids are coming from single family homes. Mm-hmm. People are struggling. And now everybody's wondering, well, why are these kids out here shooting at each other? Why are these girls out here fighting with each other? And again, it's just a product of the society that we're living in. But you got to look at the things that have happened that played some role in how kids are processing things and how they're trying to move forward.
A great point. I think there's so many different factors. I don't think there's just one answer for that, because you have to think about all the considerations like social economic status, like where these kids live, what they are exposed to.
Yeah.
We hear like a lot of crime in Chicago.
Yeah.
Think about how that was even worsened with COVID-13. It probably was a little bit safer since, they were sequestered on lockdown. But
Yeah.
you got to think about, like you said, some has single family, households where it's like just one parent, or maybe they had parents that were not there. You got to think about parents were now in the home with their kids, but were they spending that quality time with their kids when they were on lockdown? Or were they watching their kids to see what they were doing? Because we have to think, if you're not being fully watched and there's no accountability, and your kids are constantly on watching TV, on the internet, and on social media, those things heavily influence your kids, right? Now, I'm
Yeah,
not
they
going
do.
to say that parents are negligent. I'm not going to say that.
Yeah.
But there are kids that are latchkey kids, what we call them, and they
Yeah.
raise themselves.
Yeah.
So they're a product of whatever they're exposed to. So if they are spending all their time online for school and then online for social media, they can be heavily influenced by other people on social media or what they see.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
why there's a lot of cyberbullying.
Yeah.
I had a lot of clients that were victims of cyberbullying because of social media. That's all they had. Some were able to play outside, but most of the time they were kept in the house. So, you have all these things going on social media, and then you see kids either taking their own lives because of it, or they're
Exactly.
retaliating because of it.
Yeah.
Retaliation, whether it is fighting or using a weapon to harm somebody. I feel like that worsened because once kids were brought back to the environment, now you're going back to school, there was no transition phase to prepare these kids for going back into a social environment, being used to sitting in a classroom setting and being able to be still. Because we know some of these kids, they were online with their cameras off. They were not paying attention in class. Now
No.
we expect you to focus, pay attention, not have any cell phones. And then you're supposed to be in an environment where you've been isolated for so long, and now you have to be around people again. And I feel like that caused a lot of problems.
Yeah.
I feel like social media was heavily relied on during COVID.
Oh yeah, it was.
It's kids to do things that maybe they wouldn't have done had this ever happened.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you got to think about the parents too. Parents were heavily involved on social media and the internet, and they were more focused on doing that. Now we see everybody doing everybody's challenge, like everything that would be normally private and sacred is now being recorded and put on social media. And I feel like that has a lot to do with how these kids act.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something that is a whole nother podcast topic.
Yeah.
how people are using social media, TikTok, especially TikTok. Everything has to be recorded. Everything has to be on YouTube or TikTok. How many followers can I get? How much money can I make off of it? And it's almost kind of like, we're living in a society to where you don't really need to tell that much of your business. And, and I've seen, and I think and I'm going to ask you this question because I've seen a lot of women on TikTok who are talking about their experiences of domestic violence with their, and so do you think that that's helpful for them and also for others to share what they experience? Because I think it's opened up a door for people to really feel comfortable. But at the same time, you kind of have to think, how much of your personal life do you really want to put out there? Because once it's out there on social media, it's out there for a very long time. You cannot take it back.
I feel that people who choose to put their stories online, I've had this conversation before. One, it takes guts because some people might be ashamed and they're letting the world know what's going on. But it's also, I see it as a safety issue too, because a person who's experienced domestic violence, if they're currently in that situation and they're sharing it with their followers in the world and something happens, do you know how fast people get help? Like, I find that people on social media is just as good as investigators at time as law enforcement.
They
Because
are.
they can find people.
Yeah.
I mean, they can get to people when
Oh,
things so there are some benefits, especially it's
yeah.
like, you know, if they share and somebody's actively in a DV case,
Yeah.
um, if they choose to share their information like to each its own, I'm very private. I don't know if I would have the guts to do it just
Yeah.
because that's just me. But
Yeah.
some people, you have to think, some people are lonely. Some people think that they have friends and realize that they don't. And the
Hmm.
only people that they feel like they can rely on are their followers.
Yeah.
Like I always say, and I saw this even on social media today, the people who will support you are strangers. The
More than,
people who will hate on what you do are people who know you.
yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
if a
true.
person is like on social media discussing how they, you know, experience domestic violence, they're going to probably have more strangers that support them, even give them resources or even help them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
You're,
never know what blessing you may get by having the guts to share your story. People
yeah.
might have, you know, homes like shelters or hideaway houses. You know, you never know what can happen by sharing that story.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I think, when you look at somebody's, how many people are following, it's like, man, you got like 200,000 people following you. And you're really just talking about your experience of being a victim of domestic violence. People want to listen, and it's not people really criticizing.
No, it's not criticism. And then you get realize too, the person that's sharing their story could be helping somebody else.
Exactly. That's, yeah.
Whoever's watching can be inspired to get help because they've seen somebody who had the guts to share their story and their experience and make them feel like they can do the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, hey, Dr. Mo, I want to remind those who just now tuning into the podcast that tonight's topic is seeking mental health. Seeking mental health is not weakness, and so we're talking with Dr. Mo, who has a vast background in mental health. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll get to those questions throughout the chat. But again, thank you for tuning in to You and the Law podcast. And as we talk about, May being the month of mental health awareness, why do you think Mental Health Awareness Month is really important today?
I find that it's really important because that's where you can get a vast amount of resources for one. With Mental Health Awareness Month, there's different organizations that pop up. I know usually on TV for people who still watch cable. Each month,
Yeah.
whatever that month is, you can see commercials for resources, organizations, things of that nature. But like you mentioned in the beginning of the show, like mental health is just not catered to just the month of May. It should be every day. And you should
Yes.
be able to have the same access, same resources, and have the same organizations be willing to support no matter what time of the year it is. But I'm glad that there is a focus on it because it shows the importance. And you never know what comes out of this month of, what may happen, what kind of relationships would happen between companies. I'm always a proponent of having that multidisciplinary approach where you're just not working with, mental health professionals, just working with other mental health professionals. We need to be
Yeah.
working with legal teams, law enforcement. Law enforcement experiences a large component of mental health crises, especially on their calls.
Yeah.
Working with medical providers, scientists, researchers, everybody work together. And
Yeah.
I feel like this month actually helps because that's when people actually network more.
Yeah. Well, you're right. One of the things that I heard in the car a little while ago was there was a commercial about mental health, May being Mental Health Awareness Month.
Mhm.
And it was more, and it really kind of got me thinking after the commercial played, it was like contact this.com and you get 10% off of 15 or 10% off of whatever. And I'm like, if somebody is suffering from, and even in this commercial, they talked about people are really having a hard time. So do you really think that if people are really having a hard time financially, that they're going to reach out and pay for a service and they're struggling with gas, they're struggling with food. And so I don't know, what is your opinion on, is there enough private resource or public resources out there for people who cannot afford mental health services?
Well, I know in my area, I live in the DMV area. In the state of Virginia, they have community service boards in the county.
Okay.
And it's a state-run program that's supposed to help people with resources. And something like that similar in Maryland as well. I think there could be more. It's always a touchy subject because mental health providers get, we get entangled too with medical providers about high pricing.
Okay.
I just want to make this clear. I'll make this short and then I'll get back to that. When it comes to the pricing, I just want people to realize that we're not here trying to, take advantage and get a come off on pricing because yes, mental health services can be expensive, but when you think about the training, when you think about the hours, some mental health professionals have to be on call on the weekend or 7 days a week. That's a lot, especially when you have families and stuff like that. And what we do, it's not only convoluted, it's not just seeing the person. You also have to do paperwork. You have to be on top of that paperwork.
Yeah.
We deal with people who are suicidal, so we constantly have to stay on guard, especially those who are at risk.
Yeah.
We have to be on call. So yes, we have to make a living for ourselves too.
Exactly.
That's what I would like for people to understand. The pricing is based on either the service or, the testing, which is what I do, the testing. And so I know pricing can be outrageous, but then I want to put the hook back on the insurance companies because people should not have to worry about paying out of pocket for our services if more insurance had better mental health plans.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because there's insurance companies that do have good mental health plans and people will just have to pay like a low copay to see their mental health provider and be done. But then some don't.
Exactly.
And then especially when it comes to testing and assessment is somewhat expensive because it's more than just the testing. It's more components to it. So if insurance companies had better processes for taking care of their, I wouldn't say patients, but
providers or
the providers that have, people who have insurance, I don't think we would have that issue. But then we have to look at state, county programs and see what they're doing for their citizens as well. And I know, like I said, in this area, there are state-run, county-run programs that do help people that can't afford services. So.
Yeah. So I got a question for you, Dr. Mo. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people still have about mental health?
Well, I go back to the stigma. I think that's still number one, even though we've come a long way and we have more people talking, more research, advancement. We're doing AI with imaging and mental health programs and software. Like we've come a long way, but it's still the mental thing. People are like, oh my God, they see the advancement, they see the improvement, but then it's still that stigma of saying, I have something's wrong with me, or, I know something is wrong, but I just don't want to get the help because of the way I might be perceived, or people will know, or what about my job? I think that's the number one thing, even though we're saying it's okay not to be okay. You hear that all the time.
It's okay to not to be okay.
I know I'm getting mad by that saying because now they're saying that saying is meaningless because it is okay to be not okay, but people still don't feel that way. Exactly. And I think that's the problem. Once people can start feeling comfortable with saying, hey, I have a problem, I want to go get help. I think that's going to change the mindset, but we have to get more people on board, meaning we have to get more agencies, more programs, more people involved. Exactly. Even I think companies, whether it's private or public, they should have mental health professionals within their respective companies.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially, big companies like, Target, Walmart. I mean, some of these big, huge Amazon, So Dr. Mo,
difference.
Yeah. So you kind of really segue into this next little short video that I want to show. And it's about a veteran story of hope and healing. So I want to show this real quick, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Okay.
I was diagnosed bipolar and the PTSD. So there's things that go through my mind that a lot of civilians would never understand.
I came to visit him the first time. We talked a lot. By the time that I left my first visit with him, he was up and walking around.
I'm not going to run down the street, but I feel like I could because of Nurse Next Door.
So I found that, and I was like, man, it's very short, but it's very powerful, because the one thing he said was that people really don't know what he's experiencing. And I think that's what a lot of people, and how you can speak on that, is that a lot of people are just trying to figure out, well, why is this person acting the way that they're acting?
Well, I will say, to have PTSD and bipolar disorder, that's enough for one person to deal with.
Yeah.
Bipolar within itself, takes a lot on the person, a toll on them, because, they have to have medication for, it depends on what type of bipolar, if it's bipolar 1, bipolar 2, medication to manage the mania, or even medication to manage the depression. And then the medicine that manages the mania at the same time can also be linked to medical conditions if that's not monitored. So that experience that and understand, like, a person that doesn't know that he has bipolar, like a person that doesn't know him from a can of paint, and see how he acts, they might shy away from him. And I think that's what he's talking about, the stigma. You don't know what I'm going through.
Yeah.
Only the person that knows about bipolar would know.
Yeah.
But when you see a person act a certain way, like they're fine, and then they're like overly excited, and then they're depressed, it's like, what's wrong with this person? They're up, they're down. What is wrong? And then you don't want to be around them because you think something's wrong with them. Well, they're the problem. Well, you don't know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And some
exactly.
people will hide their conditions, right, because of the stigma. So they rather have people think that something's wrong with them and not and isolate themselves than rather tell somebody that they're diagnosed with a condition.
Yeah. Yeah. So another question I want to ask you, how has generational trauma impacted Black families and communities?
Oh, wow. A loaded but great question.
Yeah, I know it was a
very loaded but great question. It's that I find that to be a significant issue, because when we think about generational trauma, think of the youngest generation. Let's say, for example, the youngest generation is getting the help and the support. They're seeing, let's say they're seeing therapists doing what they need. But then you got to think about the generations before them that might still be living.
Yeah.
The trauma that they've impacted, they've lived with it. They're not getting help. They might not believe in getting help.
Exactly.
There's a lot of Black families that don't believe in mental health, and they're more focused on religion, and religion being their sole source of helping them get through the hard times and through the trauma, than going to a mental health professional. So when you have those generations and the young generation is still commingled, it causes a lot of problems. You feel like on this side, they're making headway and trying to get help and trying to improve their lifestyle. And then you have the other generations that are clashing with them because that's something they don't necessarily believe in, but then they're dealing with trauma that they're not taking care of.
Yeah.
It's definitely hard. It's like that tug of war situation.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. And the one thing that you just mentioned about, the older generation may look at it as spiritual and say, I will pray, God is going to get me through this.
Exactly.
And you have a younger generation that is like, I don't see that. And a younger generation has to see it, but an older generation is not so much seeing it. They believe in the power of prayer and that's going to get them through. But oftentimes, and young people are starting to question, well, they're not really questioning God or the faith, but it's kind of like, I don't really see anything changing.
Right.
And so, and one of the things, when you talk about, the generational trauma, you have parents who experience things in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I was born in 63.
Mhm.
And so, I think about my parents, my grandparents, the things that they experienced, and nobody really talked about mental health back in the 50s and 60s. And can you really think about what people experienced during the civil rights era?
Right.
How that trauma and how nobody said anything about it. It was just like, how did you, and again, I don't think a lot of people really realize the impact, the mental impact that families, that individuals went through. And and you're wondering why people are experiencing some of the things that they're experiencing.
Right. And it affects people differently. Like
Exactly.
what they keep inside, some people will keep their trauma and what they experience inside, and you will never know. You
Oh
will
yeah.
never know what's going on with
Yeah.
them. They did a
Yeah.
great job of containing it all these years. You gotta
Yeah.
think, my grandmother is 91 years old.
Oh, she is.
She's 91, and
Wow.
she came to visit me for a couple weeks, and we were in a grocery store, and this man was like following us, making jokes and stuff, and he's talking to my grandmother, and he's like, oh, she's young, she don't know what we experienced, what we went through. He said we experienced acid rain. He was just saying like just stuff that I never even heard of, and I'm looking, he's like, that's right, you're too young to understand. And my grandmother, she's like, well, how old do you think I am? And he was like, close to me, I think you what, mid-60s. And she's like, I'm 91, I've seen a whole lot more than you.
Oh yeah.
And so he was like amazed, like, I can't even imagine you being
Which
91 years old and what you've
yeah.
seen. And you're walking around with a smile on your face. And she said, because I am blessed and I'm happy to be alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When you have
Wow.
older people who don't dwell on what they've been exposed to, or, the trauma, if they're just happy to be living, sometimes that suffices for them.
Yeah. Well, and I'm pretty sure your grandmother she looks very young for a 91-year-old, for him to think that she was almost
Yeah.
close to his
That's
age.
that's like, he is 91. That's what I said. But he was like, life has been kind to you. He basically said that because,
Yeah.
she does walk around with a smile on her face. She
Yeah.
does have a lot to be thankful for. She's like, she walks with a cane. She's like, but I can still walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still mobile. I've
Yeah.
experienced all these different things. I think every decade something
Yeah. Something
traumatic
is traumatic
happens,
has happened.
and
Yeah.
she walks around with a smile on her face.
Yeah. And I mean, she's getting around better than some people in their 40s and 50s, Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, Dr. Mo, this is a great conversation to have about mental health. And like I said, this isn't something that you can just have a once conversation about and just think, oh, well, we talked about it and now it's really didn't help somebody. Because again, so many people are suffering from mental health. They're going through crises that some are ignoring. And to go back to the profession that I'm in law enforcement, and I think this is the one thing that I've said a lot, Dr. Mo, we cannot go into somebody's house and fix their problems when we have our own problems. We do not do a good job. And I don't think we're not even touching the surface of sending officers to get evaluated to make sure that they're mentally fit to do the job. If that may cost a lot of money, it costs a lot of money, but we wouldn't see some of the things that we've seen with George Floyd, with all of the trauma that has happened in law enforcement, because we don't put things in there to prevent these things from happening. And so when you mentioned that you went to a conference in Las Vegas and it was primarily law enforcement, what were some of the takeaways that you experienced hearing some of those conversations?
The biggest thing I took away was one word: resilience among all those officers.
Okay.
Because some of the stories I heard was so horrendous, like
Yeah.
you couldn't help but just cry.
Yeah.
Because you hear everything that they're exposed to, just like the examples you were given. One day somebody might get shot and killed, somebody dies in a car accident, or a kid is abused. They're seeing this constantly. because these cops are working in major cities like Florida, Texas, California. And so that was the one thing that I took away, because the ones who were there were the ones who managed to get help. And they all told their story of that single moment where they knew that they needed to ask for help. And what inspired me about that was because, you know, some would just continue to admit, I'm just going to do my job, or I'm going to retire and forget about it. But no, when they retired, they made a point to continue to improve their lives, to get therapy, to get help, to improve their relationships with their family members. And I commend them for that. But the one thing that I did realize is when they, you know, talked about help and doing screeners, because some police departments do have chief psychologists that they're called police psychologists, and they do the fit for duty testing. But my whole thing is, okay, so you test and assess them and they're fit for duty, but are they ready? That's
exactly. That's the difference. I
mean, he can be fit to go, but is he ready to go? And I think once they start differentiating the two and focusing on the ready part, that's going to be the game changer for law enforcement. Because they do the same thing with service members. Oh, they're fit to deploy, but are they ready? And I think that's the key.
Well, and you know, the conference that you went to, a similar conference was held in Oklahoma City back in 21, and it was COPS. I don't know if you heard, there's a organization called COPS, and they brought in a group called Warriors Rest, and there's different organizations that deal with PTSD and also mental health. And to so many men and women across the country came, and they had their own private sessions with people like you, clinicians and people in mental health. And just to hear some of the stories that some of these men and women were talking about, because it's not just like they're going to get over it the next day.
Right.
These are things that have followed them throughout their career. And I think, again, to having platforms like that is real helpful, and it's healthy because it gives people a lot of time to be put in a space to where they can really express what they're really going through.
Exactly. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Mo, I mean, I tell you, an hour goes by real fast when you're having a good conversation, and it has been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the podcast as we talk about, you know, this is what the first or second week of May, you know, Mental Health Awareness Month. And you know, the one thing I hope that people will take away from the conversation that we had is that there is help out there, and you really need to seek that help. And so what advice and what information do you have to give to those who will listen to the podcast now and listen to it later, as if they're experiencing some things dealing with mental health?
Always ask for help. I know it might be, you know, more reasons why you wouldn't want to than actually asking for it. But I'm telling you, you would feel so much better. And you ask for help the right people, because the right people are going to be the ones to actually support you. And I think that's the problem today. When people reach out for help, it might not necessarily be that right person, and then they regret doing it. You know, there's always resources. I mean, you can contact me. People contact me all the time from my website, and I will answer. If I can't help them, I will make sure that they have the right resources based on whatever state that they're in. And that's what I ask. Like, what do you need? I can't help you, but I can help you find the right person. What state are you in? And I can find the resources and send it to them. So even if you don't know which direction to go to or who do you want to reach out to, you can always reach out to me, and I'll be willing to help and lead you in the right direction, whether it's to find you a mental health provider, or, you know, if you need testing, I can just, you know, just reach out and call me.
Okay.
Or call me.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. So share your information with us. You know, your website, your social media. How can people reach out to you and find you?
Well, I'm going to be slow because I know, like, my name is long, but
and I'm gonna tell you this. I did not want to pronounce it because I did not want to mess it up. I did not want to mess up your name, nor did I want to mess up the title that you have.
So my last name is Chouraeshkenazi. The C is silent, but
Okay.
the name of my company is called the Chouraeshkenazi Group. So it's www.thechouraeshkenazigroup.com. So you can just take my name on the screen and put it in, spell it. And then my email address is info at thechouraeshkenazigroup.com. I check that email every day.
Okay.
So please feel free to send a message with any questions, concerns, or if you need assistance or a referral.
Okay. So Dr. Mo, I've got to ask you the last name. What is the last name?
So it's actually North African, Hebrew, and French. It means one that comes from the east.
Okay.
So I was born in Connecticut, so Northeast, and I'm Jewish. So.
Okay. All right then. All right. Well, I have to let everybody know, we connected on LinkedIn, and I have to tell you, LinkedIn is definitely a place to link people to. Very powerful. It links people together, and I just can't thank you enough for reaching out and sharing with me, because you were actually going through a some type of, was it a challenge or there was some kind of, so kind of talk about that before we end the podcast.
So in January, I entered the Miss Health and Fitness contest that was endorsed by the Health and Fitness magazine. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but yeah, the Health and Fitness magazine. And so it was a competition where if you won, you'd be Miss Health and Fitness and you would win $20,000 and then like a free trip to be on the cover of the magazine. Well, I wanted to do it because if I won the $20,000, I wanted to donate all the proceeds to the Wounded Warrior Project.
Wounded Warriors, yeah.
To support their mental health services. So it was a long 7 weeks, and I made number 2 in the semifinals, and that's where I ended, but it was fun, and I'm glad that we were able to raise money and proceeds. The proceeds also went to the Andrew McDonough Foundation, which helps childhood cancer. So it was for a good cause. It was a great experience, and I was glad to, help out in any way I could with that competition. So.
Yeah. Well, I saw some of your videos, and you definitely were working out. And man, I tell you,
I continue to work out. It wasn't just for the competition. But.
Yeah. Well, you definitely don't want to challenge Dr. Mo in an alley one night. So if you see Dr. Mo walking, keep on going. Don't try to flirt. Don't try to do anything like that, because this lady pumps some weight. So.
And so the older we get, we have to stay in shape. So I have to be in the gym longer to keep the same momentum that I had in my 20s.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Dr. Mo, again, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on to talk to you about mental health awareness and the fact that this is something that we need to really continue to talk about, and not just in the month of May, but every day of the week. So, but again, everybody, I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in tonight. And if you miss any parts of this podcast, you can definitely go to our YouTube channel, You and the Law Podcast, and subscribe and download this episode and share it with somebody who you may think is kind of struggling with some mental health issues. And hopefully the information that we've talked about will help somebody. So again, Dr. Mo, appreciate it and thank you. And hold on and let me close out the podcast, and I'll be right back with you. But everybody have a good night. We'll see you again next Thursday right here on You and the Law Podcast.
That's a wrap on this episode of You and the Law Podcast. We've got more eye-opening conversations and hard-hitting insights coming your way, so make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and stay ready, because the next episode might just change the way you see law enforcement forever.